There you go. I'm dropping the gavel. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Quincy. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Ways and Means Committee. I think we have 20 items on our agenda today, and we should be able to get through this pretty quickly. But look forward to everybody's questions and comments. The first number of items here, there are 18 that will be on our consent agenda. The first are a series of legal settlements with Michael Salet, Jahafra Tillis, and then a settlement with HDR Engineering, Graham Construction Services, and Siemens Water Technologies. The second item is a selection of bond counsel. There are 4 actions associated with this in selection and appointment of our bond counsel for various funding mechanisms for the city. The Communications Department is bringing forward a series of utility billing inserts, kind of a schedule of what we have on tap through November. So we're going to take these items as a schedule rather than dealing with them individually in committee. The fourth item is a bid for accepting a single bid from Pitney Bowes Pre-Sort Services, and I think there were a number of questions, so I'm going to use the prerogative of the chair and just pull that for another discussion topic. The fifth item is Information Technology Department is bringing forward an incident referral on e-charging services, telecommunication services, and HRIS system upgrade, executing the contracts with Global Source IT that we approved a couple of weeks ago. The Community Planning or Community Development and Regulatory Services Committee is bringing forward several items. One is the Jack Links expansion project. This is an authorization for an application for from Minnesota Investment Fund for $100,000 with the State Department of Employment and Economic Development. Ninth item on the agenda is the Metropolitan Council Livable Communities Local Housing Incentive Account grants, accepting and appropriating LHIA grants totaling $400,000 for several projects. The number 10 is the Upper Harbor Terminal operating budget for 2014. Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee is bringing forward an item for LifeScan fingerprint system, authorizing agreement with MorphoTrack, estimated about $13,000 for maintenance and support of LifeScan fingerprint systems in the Police Crime Lab. Transportation and Public Works Committee is bringing forward a number of items. Number 12 on the agenda is the reconstruction of existing water mains, contract amendment with Hulse Brothers Trucking, the master partnership agreement with MnDOT, authorizing execution of master plan partnership contract between the State of Minnesota Department of Transportation and the City of Minneapolis for a term ending June 30th, 2017, granting authority to the city engineer to execute additional agreements necessary to carry out the provisions of the master partnership contract. Number 15 is a maintenance agreement for MnDOT Railway Bridge. That's really hard to say. I'm going to have to take a sip. Lubricate the lips. Central Corridor LRT project. There's a series of actions here authorizing execution of subordinate funding agreements, SFA 21, with the Metropolitan Council for work associated with the resurfacing of Pleasant Avenue between Arlington and Washington. Amendment number 1 to the SFA 5, increasing the maximum reimbursement amount to the city for installation of water main isolation valves along the LRT route, and authorizing execution of Amendment 1 SFA 18 for payment to the city of costs related to traffic signals, street lighting, sewer, and water work. Number 17 is the Clean Water Fund Grant Program Agreement, authorizing execution of an agreement with the Metropolitan Council for the Clean Water Fund Grant Program to provide property owner finance assistance for repairs to private sewer services. And the final item on our consent agenda is Acceptance of the low bid for Thomas and Sons Construction for an estimated expenditure of $1.3 million for construction of ADA pedestrian ramps for the paving division, and accepting low responsive bid of Calgon Carbon Corporation for an estimated annual expenditure of $1 million to furnish and deliver powdered activated carbon to the Water Treatment and Distributions Division. So for those 17 items, if I'm going to have to move those portions of the consent agenda for approval.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes, I just had a couple of questions on number 7. I think I actually sent you an email and I said number 8's on the agenda, but I meant to say number 7. I was just curious around the Human Resource Information System upgrade. This is an amount not to exceed $850,000. I know that we on the last cycle approved $350,000 for the HRIS upgrade. I was just curious how this relates to that funding, and also just to get some more details on what that money is going for in terms of consultation. So I don't know if we want to pull that for discussion or
well, I think
how I'm going to address that.
In the interest, because I don't see anybody here from IT to talk about that question, let's go ahead and keep it on the consent, and we'll see if we can address any specific questions offline and maybe bring them up in the council meeting. But go ahead, Mr. Carpenter.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, this is directly related to that last action and is all part of the broad ERP project that the Committee of the Whole will be receiving a detailed update and framework on, I think, still later this week. So.
Yeah, that'll be part of the ERP program that'll be discussed more fully from a policy perspective on the Committee of the Whole agenda. So that could get an opportunity to answer your specific questions.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you.
Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I heard that you wanted to pull item number 3 out for discussion. Is that correct?
Not item number 3, but are you speaking about item number 4?
Number 4.
That's correct.
My apologies.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, on the consent agenda, with the exception of item number 4, which we'll talk to in a moment, all those in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? Those motions will carry on to the next council meeting. And let's go to the question of item number 4, which is brought forward by the city clerk and our procurement area, accepting a single bid for Pitney Bowes Presort Services, Inc., estimated expenditure of $383,000 to furnish and deliver presort mailing services for the city clerk's department. Mr. Carl, can you help us with that one? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is a bid for services that are managed in the Document Solutions Center, a unit under the Office of City Clerk. Presort mailing services refers to the sorting, barcoding, and the addition of postage, or the metering and addition of postage to mail produced by the city. It helps us secure a reduced rate through the United States Postal Service for the city enterprise. The contract covers vendor fees as well as the actual postage rates for all of the city-produced mail items. We've had the contract in place with the current vendor, PSI, formerly known as ZipSort, for approximately 7 years or thereabout. During that time period, the vendor fees have slightly increased. We estimate less than 5% total of the contract period during the 7 years. There is a provision in the contract that allows PSI to increase the postal fees that are charged to the city based on actual costs incurred by them based on the rate set by the United States Postal Service. There has, however, been no change in the cost of services that were provided under the previous term as the term that's being proposed now.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I think a couple of the questions that may have come up from my colleagues over the last week was some concern or interest in understanding why there was only one responsive bidder to this project, particularly given the size of the contract. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Mr. Chair, I think that, I don't know why we wouldn't have more than one vendor. My best guess is that because of the scope of services required to be produced and handled by a single company, that this is an international corporation that has expertise in these services. They offer it to us at a very highly competitive price, which saves the city approximately $72,000 on postage. And because they have had this experience with the city, have performed quite well during the life of the existing contract, and because of timeliness with getting mail out, the process of city departments submitting their mail to the Document Solution Center, the Document Solution Center each night submitting that mail to PSI, and PSI sorting, processing, barcoding, and affixing the postage and metering that out, and then putting it to the United States Parcel Service within less than 24 hours is a pretty significant process. And so having that done completely in-house with one vendor allows us to ensure the timeliness. It also allows us to exercise a little bit more oversight on chain of custody. A great deal of what we're talking about here are checks, accounts payable checks to other vendors and people who are receiving payments from the city, payroll checks to our employees, and things of that manner. So it allows us to have an easier chain of custody with one vendor. It allows us to meet our time guide so that within less than a 24-hour window, that entire process has been completed and is in the mail. That would be my guesstimate as to why someone reading our request for services would say that's a pretty big scope of work, and we may be able to do a portion of it, but not everything. And so that might explain why we have a single vendor.
Sure. And I think this opens up kind of a little more conversation about our procurement process in general, especially around how we're trying to deal with our sump requirements. I wonder if you could talk to those items a little bit, as well as Mr. Carpenter, because procurement is kind of under our Finance Property Services Department.
Mr. Chair, I might redirect your questions to Velma Corbel, the Director of our Civil Rights Department, who also is present for this meeting. And her office, as you know, does administer the Small and Underutilized Business Program for the entire enterprise. We did obviously consult with her department on this bid because of the complexity. There were no responsive bidders who met the women or minority-owned business program deliverables or requirements to do the full scale of that scope of work. So she can speak to the administration of the project a little more, and certainly Mr. Carpenter, in terms of his position as Chief Financial Officer, can speak to procurement issues.
Thank you. As Ms. Corbel, if you could join us, but if we could start with Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just briefly, as a general overview of procurement in the bid area, I will call your attention as part of this discussion. If you just look at the agenda here on item 18, you will see two other procurement situations where we are awarding business to vendors who went through a bid process, one of whom was the low bid, one of whom was the low responsive bid. The way generally procurement works in the bid area is the procurement area gets together with the department that is requesting services and develops bid specifications, which are then promulgated to the community, and at a date and time certain, bids are received. Those vendors are selected then on, in this case, in the copier case, there only was one bidder, so they get the business, notwithstanding any other reasons that they could get disqualified, but they are the only bidder, so it's a public bid, low bid wins. You'll note on item 18, one of the items did go to the low bid, and one of them went to the low responsive bidder. The bid specs are always constructed to incorporate things beyond raw price where appropriate. Included in that can be SUBP objectives, and before a bid is awarded to someone, the procurement department and the department securing services and the civil rights will have to decide whether the presumed winning bid is in fact meeting all the specifications that the city has put on the given contract.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful putting a frame for my colleagues' understanding of the whole process. It takes a long time, but we are thoroughly complying with our financial and procedural processes. Ms. Corbel.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I thank Mr. Carl and Mr. Carpenter for their explanation, but I think the issue that raised the question that came up in a series of emails to council members and staff is an issue that comes up long before the bid ever happens, and I think it is a question of competing values in the city. Mr. Carl and his department have a value and a desire for efficiencies and economies of scale by lumping several different services together under this contract. We also have the competing value of equity and inclusion, which by the size of this contract that we're talking about right now, doesn't allow for a lot of small woman-owned or minority-owned firms to be able to compete. So we have this conflict that we need to try to resolve. The Civil Rights Department will be coming back to the City Council later this year with some proposed amendments to our small and underutilized business program ordinance, as well as the supplier diversity program in the city, to try to get at some of these conflicts, because it's one of those situations where there is really no right or wrong answer. And I certainly understand the city clerk's desire to meet those efficiencies and economies of scale. But again, with a $383,000 contract, it's just very difficult when you lump that many services together under that size contract to be able to open up opportunities to small women-owned and minority-owned firms. And we run into that problem quite a bit in the city, and this is not the first time, I'm sure you know, where we've had these discussions at the city council or by the policymakers in the city. And so we're going to be working in the next few weeks and months to figure out a way to try to balance some of that competition between those different values.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my questions regarding this when looking at this, so granted this is based off of my experience sending out a lot of mailings myself quite recently. I noticed, for instance, on postcards, our postage rate is a little over 24 cents per postcard. I think the rate I was getting was about little under 16 cents a postcard when I was sending them out. And my understanding of that is that that's saturation rate when you're hitting enough mailboxes within a certain zip code. And part of that's just optimization of mail in general. My question here is, what percent of our mail is hitting saturation rate? And when we do hit saturation rate and then we save additional dollars, are those dollars being given to Pitney Bowes Presort Services, Inc., or are they coming back to the city when there are cost savings associated with whatever we're sending out?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I'm not for sure I can answer that question. We would have to look into that and get back to you on a response to saturation levels within certain predetermined types of mail based on certain categories. Very broadly, without breaking it down into the specifics you're at, we bid based on historical types of mail that are produced by any of the city departments. So a postcard is an example, and we try and do a rough estimate of how much do we think we might do in a year, and then project that over the life of a 3-year period. So those are estimates based on past experience that may or may not then be the actual expenditures used during the life of this contract in this year, or the second year of the contract, or the third year of the contract. But it locks in a guaranteed price for us that's substantially less than the first rate class mail postage we would be paying if we didn't use this service.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Mr. Carl. My interest is when we do have opportunities to hit that saturation rate, we do have opportunities to meet that efficiency because we're sending out that bulk, that whoever we go with is providing that service, looking for that opportunity to really utilize the postal code to save the city and ultimately the taxpayers money, and that it's not something that they just get to keep that money if we are encountering some savings, but that we can actively get that back and put that towards all the other competing priorities that are so important to us.
Mr. Chair, through the chair, we would obviously have that as one of our goals as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all. As this is pulled for a little bit more enlightenment, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to move this item for approval as it is the sole bid for this service. All those in favor, please say aye.
Mr. Chair, can I amend that to table it for next council session so that we can get that information on saturation rates and where that actual savings of money goes and if it comes back to the city?
I would say that we'd have that opportunity to discuss it in the council meeting, but our intent is not to slow down this process of this approval for this agreement and negotiate deals within the information. But I do hope we can get that information to the these members as well as the full council in time for a conversation on Thursday or Friday.
Great, thank you.
All those in approval of the motion as made, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? That item carries. So now we can move to our posted discussion items. So what's our number here? Item number 19, dealing with leadership training with Partners in Leadership, Inc. for $50,000. Oh, Chief, nice to see you. Please introduce yourself to the committee and present on this item.
Absolutely. I'm Deputy Chief Travis Glampy with Police Department. I oversee the Office of Professional Standards, which does include our leadership and organizational development, i.e. our training. And I was asked to come today just to talk a little bit about the Partners in Leadership training that we have been undergoing and are going to continue this year. And what I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of what we do, in that it's a unique thing to certainly the police department, and I'm guessing to a lot of the organizations within the city. We tried to step outside the box as a police department and do some leadership training that's meant from all the way from the chief to the executive team right down to the line officer working a dog watch shift in either, 5th, 4th precinct or whatnot. And the key to the whole key to the training, it's based on the book, The Oz Principle. And it's all about accountability and changing that culture of accountability. Because what we learned, until each person has accountability, and as you probably can tell, it's very dynamic. At the top, it's a little bit different, or it's a lot of bit different than when you get down to that line officer. But irregardless, until each individual has that accountability in what they're doing on many different levels, we are never going to be that great organization that the chief talks about. We're good at what we do. We strive to be great. And until that accountability comes through, and what we found is it's not just as easy as going to somebody and saying, hey, you do this and be accountable for it. It's truly much more complex than that, and that's what the Oz Principle talks about, and that's what leadership, our Partners in Leadership, deals with. It's about drilling down and seeing the problems, owning them, solving the problems, and then doing something about it, having the courage, whether it be a chief of police, a police lieutenant, or an officer. When you see something that's not in place, having the courage and the skills to be accountable for owning it and doing something about it. And it might be as simple as a quick fix, or it might be something as courageous as bringing something to a supervisor that's going to have adverse consequences to somebody else. And again, it's not just as easy as pointing your finger and telling somebody this is what you will do, because we've learned over time it truly isn't that easy. We're trying to bring private corporation principles to what we do in the police department, because we all recognize that we are a business. Like it or not, in the city, we run a multi-million-dollar, if you can even characterize it bigger than that, business. And it's about learning customer service skills, just all the things that you would put into one of the large corporations we have here in town. And with that, we recognize that the Oz Principle was the organization we wanted to go with, because it does drill down to accountability. And I don't know if there was any local options that we could have looked at. I wasn't part of that selection process. The chief was, and the minute we walked into our leadership positions well over a year ago, we were handed this book. So she was on top of this right from the beginning. So I can't really talk about other local things, but I'm certainly excited about the fact that we're bringing this group, and I can't give you examples of other departments, but I would hope to say that we're one of the few police departments around, if not nationally, to utilize this program.
Thank you, Chief Clavey. I'm sure we'll have some additional questions for you, but I think this is an incredibly important topic, so that's why I really wanted to highlight it today. Not for the mere fact it's $50,000, but I wanted to really show the public that this is something that the department is taking very seriously. And leadership training is an important job, a way to implement some of our policies in place to benefit the entire population of Minneapolis and beyond. So thank you for bringing this forward. Can you tell me a little bit more about our relationship with Partners in Leadership in the past? Is this a new organization or is something we've worked with before?
No, they've been around for, I think, 20 to 25 years, but we only started working with them just last year. Like I said, the chief's been on this book for quite a while. I mean, and she presented it to us in the leadership, and then we actually brought them in starting last March, and we've had 3 trainings with them already. I think we've hit around 100 to 120 people. We're trying to start at the top, work our way to the bottom, with the goal, it would be great eventually to bring every single person through. Cost-wise, logistically, it's going to be difficult. The key is to get down into that middle level management where the dog watch supervisors who are out at 3 in the morning, they're bringing these things to the officers. So that's our goal, is to drill down. Now we're going to come back and we're bringing these folks back for reinforcement, because even at our level, it's real easy to kind of lose traction. We need to keep that up on an everyday basis. If you don't do this routinely, it's not going to work. And I think we've got good traction. We don't want to lose that. And again, it's all about bringing just the key principles and knowing that, our goals of public safety, public trust, employee engagement, morale, until that gets instilled in every single person, we have work to do. And that's what this program intends to bring to us.
Okay, thank you. Questions from committee members? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious how many officers we can expect to be trained this time, and also what the travel waiver is for. Is that specifically bringing people in?
Absolutely. Council Chair, Council Member. In March, we're going to have 42 to 45 people coming through this round, and then I would anticipate more in the year. We're going to try, they have a limit, but it's usually right around 40. That's the optimal learning number. They don't want to exceed that, or it gets a little bit chaotic. The travel waiver, the city policy says that we reimburse from home base to Minneapolis and then back to home base. This organization, when they come in, they might be coming in from Nestle Corporation, training us, flying out to Alcoa. They are a national organization, Microsoft, Starbucks, you name a large company, and they've probably trained them. So it's not as simple as them flying from their home base to us and then back. Chances are they're going to the next bigger corporation than us, or coming from there to do that training. Therefore, the travel waiver is getting outside that home base to us and back, round trip, so to speak.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Chief Glampy, you had alluded to the fact that when you started your position, in a leadership position, you were given that book, The Oz Principle. And can you explain what that exactly is? And can you, give us some highlights from the book? Or from, I'm hoping you read the whole thing.
$50,000 yada.
Yes, if you can, give us some highlights. Absolutely. Mr. Chair, Council Member. Yes, there was a test by the chief on that for all the No. It's a dynamic book in that it brings, there's a couple key things, summaries I can give you. There's a 4-step process. It's about problem solving. It's see the problem, own it, solve it, and then do it. If you fall down in any one of those 4 things, the problem doesn't go away. If you can't recognize a problem, if you're not brave enough, or if you're not willing to solve it and then be brave enough to do something about it, you've done nothing for the problem. So until you hit each one of those 4 things, you've essentially done nothing. And an even easier example that the book gives is they describe above-the-line thinking, below-the-line thinking. In the most simplest of terms, ask yourself what you're doing at each individual call as an officer. Am I thinking above the line, or am I going below the line? And we even made that simpler for officers when Chief Harteau talked about, on each individual call, are you giving the service that you would want one of your family members to be receiving if they had to call for the police? And I really think that sums up the book. Now, it's not quite that easy because until we get everybody to buy in, but certainly those are a couple of the key principles of the book. And it is amazing when you can simplify it that much. It does make life a whole lot easier, but until you're willing to subscribe to those things and actually make it that easy, it's not going to work. So that's what we've pulled from the book. And interestingly enough, this book is part of our promotional process. So our last lieutenant's list, and I can't remember, I don't think we're using it for our current sergeant's list because we don't want to use the same books on 2 different tests in a year, but we are using this. We're requiring our promotional candidates to read this book, and questions are pulled out for the written test.
Very good. Nice to see all that coordinated effort. Councilmember Yang?
Yeah, I'd like to move.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one comment, I guess, is that with the request for council action, there wasn't a lot of detail on that. So on future RCAs, it would be great for these trainings if we could get some of that background information. And I certainly do appreciate the presentation today and what we learned. It sounds like a very good program. And just going forward in the future, it would be great to get a little more detail on that.
Chairman,
Ms. Gluck?
can I make one clarification too? Is something that came up that somebody said. It's not $1,000 per person. This contract is for the year-long period of time. It's actually turns out to be around $300 per person. So the next class that we're having is for 42 people. It's not the full $50,000 amount. Again, this is a full contract for the year. So I just wanted to clarify that so that you didn't think it was actually a full $1,000 per person, which would be pretty pricey.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments on this item? Okay. Thank you very much, folks. All those in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. And the final item for today is the discussion of the Viking Stadium report monitoring. And Ms. Corbel, you'll be making this presentation. Obviously, anything that has the word Viking Stadium in it, I'm excited to tell the world what good work we're doing with it.
Mr. Chair and committee members, for the record, my name is Velma Corbel. I'm the director in the Office of Civil Rights. The request before you today, I've tried to put some detail in the request for council action that just gives you a background on sort of the chronology of what we've gone through in terms of developing the Viking Stadium equity plan, starting at the very beginning back in 2012 when the Viking Stadium legislation was passed, and now today here asking for your authorization to move a $36,000 increase into the Civil Rights Department budget for 2014. But this particular action is related to the fact that the Vikings Stadium legislation requires the payment of prevailing wages to workers in the construction of the new stadium. And the Viking Stadium Equity Plan requires the inclusion of minority and female employees at 32% and 6% respectively. The prevailing wages and minority and female inclusion must be tracked and monitored to ensure compliance with those requirements. Now, that's not the only thing that the Viking Stadium Equity Plan requires, but this is what this action is dealing with today. The Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority does not have a way to track prevailing wage and the workforce compliance efficiently, but the city's Contract Compliance Division does. The Sports Facilities Authority, by this item that's before you, is essentially renting space on the city's compliance database to be able to track and monitor prevailing wage and workforce compliance. So the item is to increase the Civil Rights Department's appropriation in 2014 of about $36,000, and the exact amount is in the item, $36,387, to pay for the server space on the contract compliance database, and that the money that would be taken in would be used to pay back the city's contract to LCP Tracker, which is our compliance database contractor. So that is what this item is about today. And there's a more in-depth presentation on Viking Stadium compliance that I've asked to be put on the agenda for the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee on February 12th.
Thank you very much, Ms. Corbel. Are there any questions of Ms. Corbel on this item? Good. Thank you very much, bringing it forward. I'll be happy to move this item for approval. All those in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That item carries. Unfortunately, Councilmember Glidden, our item are full today. So our agenda is complete, so we are adjourned. Thank you.